The English Civil War from 1642 to 1651 was a complex struggle rooted in social, political, and religious issues. Deep-seated tensions, exacerbated by those in power, had been simmering for decades. At the heart of this conflict was a fundamental disagreement about governance. Who held ultimate power, the king or parliament? This power struggle was deeply intertwined with religious differences, further fueling discontent. The Protestant Reformation had left its mark, with Puritanism challenging the established order. Puritans sought to purify the Church of England, clashing with its Catholic-like rituals. King Charles I's support for the established church alienated Puritans, deepening divisions. Charles's belief in the divine right of kings put him on a collision course with Parliament. The struggle for power between the monarchy and Parliament became increasingly bitter. By the early 1640s, the nation stood on the precipice of a devastating civil war. Charles I, who ascended the throne in 1625, was a man of deep conviction, firmly believing in the divine right of kings. This belief, deeply ingrained in his worldview, shaped his approach to governance and ultimately led to his downfall. Charles saw himself as God's chosen representative on earth, answerable only to God, not to Parliament or the people. This belief manifested in Charles's autocratic style of rule. He clashed repeatedly with Parliament over finances, dissolving the legislative body several times when it refused to grant him the funds he demanded. To bypass Parliament's control over taxation, Charles resorted to outdated medieval methods of raising revenue, further alienating the merchant classes and the gentry who bore the brunt of these levies. Adding to the growing discontent was Charles's marriage to Henrietta Maria, a Catholic French princess. This union, in a climate of religious suspicion, fueled fears among Protestants that Charles sought to undermine the Church of England and reintroduce Catholicism. The Queen's Catholic entourage and her open practice of Catholicism at court did little to assuage these anxieties. Charles's actions, driven by his belief in his absolute authority, ignited a firestorm of opposition. The period from 1629 to 1640, known as the 11 Years' Tyranny, saw Charles rule without Parliament, governing through his own decrees and further alienating powerful factions within English society. This period of personal rule only served to deepen the rift between the king and his people, pushing England closer to the brink of civil war. Parliament, composed of the House of Lords representing the nobility and the House of Commons representing the gentry and merchants, viewed Charles I's actions with growing alarm. The king's increasing attempts to centralize power and bypass the traditional parliamentary process was seen as a direct affront to their established roles and privileges. They saw his attempts to bypass their authority and his disregard for their traditional rights and privileges as a direct threat to the established order. The tension between the monarchy and Parliament was palpable, with both sides preparing for a potential showdown. The conflict came to a head in 1640 when Charles, in desperate need of funds to suppress a rebellion in Scotland, was forced to recall Parliament. This was a significant moment, as it marked the first time in over a decade that Parliament had been convened. This Parliament, known as the Short Parliament, proved unwilling to grant Charles the money he sought without addressing their grievances, leading to another swift dissolution. The members of Parliament were adamant that their concerns be heard and addressed before any financial aid was provided. However, the king's financial woes did not disappear. The rebellion in Scotland continued to drain his resources, and without the support of Parliament, his ability to govern effectively was severely hampered. The Scottish rebellion continued, forcing Charles to recall Parliament once again, this time marking the beginning of the Long Parliament, a pivotal moment in English history. This Parliament would not be so easily dismissed and was determined to assert its authority. The Long Parliament, emboldened by the king's vulnerability, seized the opportunity to curb his power. They were resolute in their mission to ensure that the monarchy could not operate without parliamentary consent. They passed a series of reforms designed to limit the king's authority, including the Triennial Act, which required Parliament to be summoned at least once every 3 years, preventing the king from ruling alone as he had done during the 11 Years' Tyranny. This act was a significant step towards ensuring a more balanced distribution of power. Furthermore, Parliament sought to control the king's ministers, impeaching some of his most powerful advisors, including Thomas Wentworth, the Earl of Strafford, who was seen as a key architect of the king's policies, and William Laud, the Archbishop of Canterbury, both seen as instruments of the king's absolutist ambitions. Their trials were highly publicized and served as a warning to others who might support the king's overreach. The execution of Strafford in 1641, sanctioned by Charles himself in a move he would later regret, sent shockwaves through the kingdom and signalled the growing power of Parliament. This act demonstrated the lengths to which Parliament was willing to go to check the king's power and protect their own authority. Section 4. Swords drawn, battles and the rise of the new model army. By the summer of 1642, England was on the brink of war. The tension between King Charles I and Parliament had reached a boiling point. Both King and Parliament had raised armies, each drawing support from different segments of society. The Royalists, known as Cavaliers, drew their strength from the nobility and those loyal to the crown. The Parliamentarians, called Roundheads, found support among merchants, artisans and Puritans. The early years of the war were marked by indecisive skirmishes and sieges. The tide turned with the emergence of the new model army, formed in 1645 under Sir Thomas Fairfax. This professional, disciplined force was driven by a fervent belief in their cause. The new model army promoted officers based on skill and experience, unlike the Royalist army. Their success on the battlefield marked a turning point, leading to the downfall of the Royalist cause and the execution of King Charles I. Section 5. Nasby's decisive blow, a turning point in the war. The Battle of Naseby, fought on June 14, 1645, proved to be the decisive encounter of the English Civil War. The Parliamentarian New Model Army, under the command of Sir Thomas Fairfax and his brilliant cavalry commander Oliver Cromwell, faced off against the Royalist forces led by Prince Rupert of the Rhine, Charles V's nephew. Naseby showcased the superior discipline and tactics of the new model army. Cromwell's cavalry, fighting with religious zeal and unwavering discipline, shattered the Royalist cavalry, a pivotal moment in the battle. The rout of Prince Rupert's cavalry, once considered invincible, left the Royalist infantry exposed and vulnerable. The Parliamentarians, pressing their advantage, overwhelmed the Royalist forces, inflicting a crushing defeat upon the King's army. The Battle of Naseby was a turning point in the war, effectively breaking the back of Royalist resistance and solidifying Parliament's control over much of England. The capture of the Royalist baggage train at Naseby revealed Charles I's private correspondence, exposing his attempts to seek foreign aid and his willingness to negotiate with Irish Catholic rebels. This discovery further eroded support for the king, portraying him as desperate and untrustworthy in the eyes of many. Naseby marked the beginning of the end for Charles I's reign. Although the war dragged on for several more years, the king, weakened and increasingly isolated, was unable to recover from this devastating defeat.